Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for a deep dive?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Today we're traveling back in time, heading to the 1830s to hang out with Alexis de Tocqueville.
Tocqueville, the OG observer of American democracy. His Democracy in America is like required reading for, well, anyone who wants to understand this whole experiment we call America,
Oh,
right?
got it. But here's the thing. It's not just some dusty old history book. This guy was asking questions about democracy, freedom, even superpowers that are still blowing minds in 2024. Seriously.
What makes Tocqueville so fascinating is that he was asking these really, really big questions about whether people are actually cut out to govern themselves. Like, can we actually do this whole democracy thing without it all falling apart?
Right. And remember, this is a French aristocrat, so not exactly someone you'd expect to be gung-ho about the whole power to the people thing.
Exactly. He'd seen firsthand how unstable things could get, especially with the French Revolution still pretty fresh in everyone's minds.
So picture this. Tocqueville, this French aristocrat, rocks up to the U.S. in the 1830s. He's immediately struck by this radical idea of equality that America's supposedly built on. But, and this is a big but, he's also seen how quickly revolutions can go sideways.
And that's the key, right? He wasn't here to judge, not exactly. He genuinely wanted to figure out if this whole democracy thing had staying power or if it was destined to implode.
And remember, this is a time when democratic ideals are spreading through Europe like wildfire. Tocqueville wasn't just writing about America, he was trying to understand the future of democracy, period. Could the U.S. be a model for the world, or was it all going to go up in flames?
He was really trying to get to the heart of it all to see if it could actually work in the long run.
And get this, one of the things he becomes convinced of is that America and Russia will become global superpowers. Now, from where we're sitting, post-Cold War and everything, that's kind of freaky, right?
Talk about predicting the future. But here's the thing about Tocqueville. He wasn't into just saying what would happen. He was more about understanding the forces at play, the why behind it.
So what was the why in this case?
He saw these two nations, America and Russia, as embodying two totally opposite forces. You've got America, all about individual freedoms and, that whole pursuit of happiness thing. And then you've got Russia, with its long history of, well, let's just say, not so much freedom.
Autocracy, serfdom, that whole vibe.
Exactly. But his point was, the future wasn't set in stone. It wasn't predetermined. He really believed that which path the world went down, that choice was ours to make.
That's a heavy responsibility, right?
No kidding. But speaking of responsibility, Tocqueville had some pretty intense things to say about the potential downsides of this whole democracy thing, even though he believed in freedom.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly wearing rose-colored glasses, was he?
Not at all. One of the things that really worried him was this concept of the tyranny of the majority. And he wasn't just talking about like jackbooted thugs shutting down protests. He was talking about something way more subtle and insidious, this intense social pressure to conform.
So it's like, even if you're technically free to speak your mind, you're still under pressure to shut up and go along with the crowd.
Exactly. He'd seen it firsthand in France. He was deeply worried that a democratic majority, even if most of them are well-intentioned, could become just as oppressive as any dictator.
It's like everyone's living in an echo chamber afraid to rock the boat.
Exactly. And Tocqueville was saying, hey, if everyone's too afraid to speak up, to question things, to challenge the status quo, then how can we have real progress? How can we have a society that's actually free?
So it's not enough to just have the right to free speech. We have to actively cultivate a culture that encourages it. But what happens when those, let's say, uncomfortable conversations clash with what the majority believes? Tocqueville had some, shall we say, interesting thoughts on how religion played into all of this.
This is where it gets really interesting, right? Because here you have this French intellectual, not exactly known for being devoutly religious, right? And he's looking at America and saying, hold on a second, there's something really important happening here with religion and democracy.
So what was he seeing?
He saw how religion, especially the Protestant denominations that were really prevalent then, instilled this deep sense of personal morality, this sense of duty to your community. And he thought that played a huge role in shaping the national character, at least back then.
So it's not about forcing everyone to follow one specific religion, but rather recognizing the influence religion had on the country's development, at least according to Tocqueville.
Exactly. He wasn't saying it was perfect, but he was definitely picking up on how it was shaping things.
Okay, so we've got this potential powder keg of majority rule, and religion's acting as this unexpected moderating force. But Tocqueville, being Tocqueville, he keeps digging deeper into all these different social dynamics, and he gets really interested in the role of women. And this is where his writing really gets interesting, especially from a 2024 perspective.
This is one of the parts of democracy in America that still sparks so much debate. Tocqueville recognized this inherent contradiction in how American society treated women. On the one hand, you have this very clear expectation of, women staying in their lane, being wives and mothers, not participating in politics. But at the same time, he observed that American women were actually highly educated, especially compared to their European counterparts.
It's definitely a different picture from the stereotypical image we might have of the meek and mild 19th century woman, right?
Exactly. And Tocqueville was picking up on that. He saw that American women had this different kind of power, this soft power. They were shaping the nation's character in ways that weren't always obvious or, in the headlines, but they were incredibly influential nonetheless.
It's like they were the architects behind the scenes, quietly shaping the very fabric of society.
Right. He saw how they were educating children, influencing their husbands, being really active in their communities. And he was basically saying, hey, if you want to understand America, you can't ignore the influence of women.
He was really trying to connect the dots between all these different aspects of American life to see the bigger picture.
He was, and that's what makes his writing so insightful, even today. Tocqueville was saying that democracy isn't just about voting rights or who's in office. It's about this incredibly complex web of individual beliefs, social structures, cultural norms. It's all connected.
It's like trying to solve a giant jigsaw puzzle, and he was trying to figure out where all the pieces fit.
Exactly. And one of those pieces that really fascinated him was this very American love of joining. Well, everything. Tocqueville was amazed by how much Americans love to form groups and associations.
It's like that saying, Americans love to join a club, and then they start a club for the club.
That's a good one. But it wasn't just about socializing, at least not for Tocqueville. He saw this spirit of association, as he called it, as a fundamental strength of American democracy. He thought it was a way for people to come together, to find common ground, to actually practice democracy on a smaller scale.
So it's like these groups, whether it's a church group, a bowling league, a book club, whatever, they become these mini schools for democracy.
Exactly. He saw them as these little laboratories of democracy where people learn how to debate, how to compromise, how to work together, all without the government having to step in and tell them what to do.
It's like that sweet spot between total individualism and an overbearing government. People are coming together, figuring things out for themselves, and building a stronger society in the process.
Exactly. Tocqueville was convinced that this art of association, as he called it, was crucial for cultivating informed, engaged citizens. And he believed that the more people participated in these groups, the less likely they were to blindly follow the crowd. They were more likely to think for themselves, to question authority, and to stand up for what they believed in. And you know what's even more fascinating? He thought this whole spirit of association could actually help to prevent the very tyranny of the majority we were talking about earlier.
Wait, really? How so?
Think about it. If you're constantly interacting with people from different walks of life, if you're used to hearing different perspectives, you're less likely to just blindly go along with whatever the loudest voices are saying. You're more likely to be critical, to think for yourself, to maybe even be the one speaking up and saying, hey, wait a minute.
So it's like building up a kind of resistance to that pressure to conform, and that feels incredibly relevant in our age of social media and these echo chambers we can get stuck in, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it makes you wonder what Tocqueville would have to say about our online communities, about social media activism, about the ways we connect and disconnect in the digital age. But that's a whole other deep dive.
Definitely. Okay, so we've got this fascinating mix of individualism and this love of joining things. It's like this constant push and pull between the individual and the community.
Right. And Tocqueville was fascinated by how this played out in American politics, especially when it came to the relationship between local and federal government. Remember, he was coming from a much more centralized system in France, so seeing these small, self-governing towns and cities in America was pretty mind-blowing for him.
It's like they were these little experiments in democracy, each one trying to figure things out in its own way.
Exactly. He called these townships the schools of democracy, where citizens learned firsthand how to participate in public life, how to debate issues, how to make decisions, how to hold their leaders accountable, all on a local level. He even went so far as to say that these local governments were more vital to the success of the American experiment than the federal government itself.
Whoa, that's a bold statement, especially considering the whole American Revolution thing was about throwing off the shackles of a powerful, distant government.
It was a bold statement.
Mm.
But he really believed that without this strong foundation of local self-government, the whole system would be vulnerable. He saw these local governments as a way to prevent both tyranny and apathy, keeping power from becoming too centralized, and making sure that citizens were actively involved in shaping their own communities.
So it's like that old saying, think globally, act locally. But Tocqueville was basically saying, if you want a strong national democracy, you need strong local democracies.
Exactly. He saw that connection very clearly.
And this whole idea of spreading out power, of decentralization, it wasn't limited to just those local governments. Tocqueville was also really interested in the American judicial system, especially this concept of judicial review.
Oh, yeah, judicial review fascinated him. See, Tocqueville saw something in America's system he thought was kind of revolutionary. Courts, like actual judges, could look at a law, even one Congress passed, and say, nope, this violates the Constitution, it's out of here.
It's like having a referee who can just blow the whistle if one side gets a little too powerful.
Exactly. And he thought that was huge for preventing, you guessed it, that tyranny of the majority we keep coming back to.
Because even the majority has to follow the rules, right?
Right. And you knew there was going to be a but. Tocqueville was also realistic about this whole thing. He knew giving judges that much power, well, it could backfire.
Makes sense. They're human after all, not
Yeah.
robots.
Exactly. He was worried they could get too big for their britches, become so disconnected from the people they're supposed to be serving that their decisions are just like personal opinions dressed up in fancy legal language.
So how do you balance that? How do you make sure judges are independent enough to actually uphold the law, but still accountable to the people? Tocqueville really wrestled with that one.
He did, and honestly, it's something we're still figuring out. Tocqueville, he thought the key was having judges who were not just legal scholars all up in their books, but folks who really understood the heart and soul of America.
So not just knowing the laws, but really getting the values behind them.
Exactly. He wanted judges who saw themselves as interpreters of those shared values that are like baked into the Constitution, not just some document, but a reflection of what Americans believe in.
It's like they're supposed to be guardians of the American experiment, not just legal technicians.
Right. They need to understand the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. And that's tricky, right?
No kidding. And speaking of tricky, Tocqueville was pretty interested in how American democracy handled this whole leadership thing. Like, he compared the American system with its frequent elections and all that to the more, shall we say, stable systems of aristocratic governments he was used to.
And let's be honest, those aristocratic systems weren't exactly known for being super responsive to what the people actually wanted.
More like, we're in charge because we were born into it, so deal with it.
Pretty much. But yeah, Tocqueville saw how all this campaigning, the constant back and forth, it could make it tough to get anything done.
Like, try getting a long-term plan in place when you've got an election every 2 seconds.
Exactly. He saw how that constant pressure to win elections could make politicians, well, a little short-sighted. But, and this is the thing about Tocqueville, he also saw the flip side.
Which is?
That all those elections, annoying as they might be, they force politicians to actually listen to the people they're supposed to be representing. It keeps them on their toes, They can't just get comfy in office and ignore everyone.
So it's about finding that sweet spot again, isn't it? Between having enough stability to actually govern, but also staying connected to the will of the people.
Exactly. But Tocqueville even suggested, and this is going to sound familiar, that maybe the American system was too responsive to what the majority wanted.
Hold up. Too much democracy. How's that even possible?
He called it legislative instability, which is a fancy way of saying that if politicians are constantly tripping over themselves to please the loudest voices in the room, they might never make the tough, long-term decisions that are actually best for everyone.
So it's like trying to steer a ship by committee, with everyone yelling out different directions.
Pretty much. He was worried that kind of short-term thinking would make it hard to tackle the really big, complex challenges that require, actually looking beyond the next election cycle.
Makes you think about some of the issues we're grappling with today, right?
Right.
Climate change, social inequality, all these things that require long-term vision.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Tocqueville so relevant. He was asking these really hard questions about the nature of democracy, about human nature itself, that we're still trying to answer today.
He was way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that really struck Tocqueville about Americans was their incredible energy, this drive to constantly do more, be more, achieve more. He called it a restless spirit.
Oh, yeah. He was blown away by that. Remember, he's coming from a culture that was a bit more, shall we say, leisurely in its pace of life. And then he gets to America, and it's like everyone's in a hurry to build the future.
It's like that classic American hustle, right?
Yeah.
Always striving, always pushing forward.
Exactly. And he saw it everywhere, in their work ethic, their entrepreneurial spirit, their desire to expand westward, to conquer new frontiers. Tocqueville believed this restless spirit was a powerful force, the engine that drove American innovation and economic growth.
But knowing Tocqueville, I'm guessing he also saw a potential downside to all that ambition.
You know it. He worried that taken to an extreme, this restless spirit could lead to impatience, to a focus on short-term gains over long-term goals, and this constant yearning for something more, even when they'd already achieved so much.
It's like that old saying, the grass is always greener.
Exactly. And he worried that this constant striving, this feeling of never being satisfied, could actually undermine the very happiness and fulfillment that Americans were working so hard to achieve.
It's like they were so busy chasing the future that they forgot to appreciate the present.
Exactly. And he saw this play out in America's love of material prosperity. Now, it's important to remember, Tocqueville wasn't against prosperity itself. He saw how hard work and innovation had improved the lives of many Americans.
He seemed to genuinely admire that entrepreneurial spirit, that drive to build something new.
He did. But he also saw how this pursuit of material well-being, what he called the taste for physical well-being, could become all-consuming. Like, what happens when people start valuing things over relationships or money over meaning?
So it's not that money is bad, but it's about what happens when it becomes the only goal, right?
Exactly. He was worried that a society solely focused on material wealth would eventually lose sight of all those other things that make life meaningful. Things like community, creativity, intellectual pursuits, even spirituality.
It's like that age-old question, can money buy happiness? Tocqueville seemed to be saying, well, it's complicated.
It is complicated, and this gets to the heart of Tocqueville's concerns about the future of democracy. He was worried that if people became too focused on their own material well-being, they'd become disconnected from their communities and less likely to participate in civic life.
Because if you're doing just fine, why rock the boat, right?
Right. But Tocqueville argued that civic engagement, that willingness to participate in the messy business of self-government, that's the lifeblood of a healthy democracy. And he worried that a society overly focused on individual material gain would eventually lose sight of that.
So how do you prevent that? How do you keep people engaged and remind them that a thriving democracy requires, well, active citizens?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we're still wrestling with today. It really is. And it's a question Tocqueville wrestled with throughout democracy in America. But he did offer some clues. He believed that a strong democracy needs citizens who are willing to look beyond their own immediate interests and see the bigger picture.
It's like that old saying, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Exactly. Tocqueville believed that a healthy democracy requires a sense of shared purpose, a belief that we're all in this together and that we have a responsibility to contribute to the common good.
It's not just about our rights, it's about our responsibility.
Exactly. And he worried that a society too focused on individual material gain would lose sight of that people might become so caught up in their own lives, their own pursuits, that they forget about the importance of civic engagement, of participating in the messy, often frustrating, but ultimately essential work of self-government.
And that's where things can start to unravel, right? When people become so disillusioned, so disconnected, that they're willing to hand over their freedom to anyone who promises to make things easier, to solve all their problems.
Exactly. And that's the real danger of this gentle despotism that Tocqueville warned about. It's not always about tyrants and dictators. Sometimes it's about our own willingness to trade freedom for security, for convenience, for the illusion that someone else will take care of everything.
It's a sobering thought. But it's also a powerful reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something that just happens to us. It's something we have to actively create and nurture and defend every single day.
So well said. Tocqueville would be proud. Reading Democracy in America today, it's remarkable how relevant it still feels. It's like he's speaking directly to us across time and continents, warning us about the challenges that we face even now in the 21st century.
It's a reminder that the work of democracy is never truly done.
Never done. And that's why it's so important to keep these conversations going, to keep questioning, to keep learning from the past, and to keep striving, always, to create a more just, more equitable, and more free society for everyone.
That's a powerful message to end on. So until next time, keep those Tocquevillian ideals close at heart and keep those deep dive conversations flowing.